Pirates are evil, the Navy is just. But that's only true because history tells us so. Children who've never known peace have different values than children who've never known war. The one who wins will rewrite the definition of right and wrong. They'll decide the future and how the past is written. Will justice prevail? Why, there's no other way! The winner will define the meaning of justice!
I strive to talk about villains on this channel. Villains that I think are done exceedingly well, and to my credit, a lot of people seem to like it when I talk about the positives of well-done villains. Some of my more lucrative videos on the channel, if I'm honest, as well. And while I've dipped my toe into talking about villains outside my usual topic of video games, I played it a bit safe by talking about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So bear with me as we tackle the topic from another series that I've grown up alongside with, and have had a bit of a love and hate relationship with, One Piece.
Bon voyage, have the courage that sail and believe, and we will see a glimpse of the sun.
And if the title and opening didn't give it away, we'll be talking about probably one of my favorite villains from the series, Don Quixote Doflamingo.
And you shouldn't be getting cocky, my friend.
Naturally, with a topic like this, there are going to be some pretty big spoilers for character and history of the series. Plus, I'm not going to be holding your hand through everything, so with that out of the way, I'm MangaKamen, and remember, it's all about the smiles. To give a brief overview of who Doflamingo is, he was one of the major antagonists through a good portion of One Piece. Years ago in the Dressrosa arc, he was one of the 7 warlords, a former celestial dragon, the king of Dressrosa, and was a broker for one of the 4 members of the sea and the underworld. We're actually introduced to Doflamingo quite early in One Piece, chapter 233 in episode 151, with another one of the warlords, Crocodile, having been defeated and a replacement being sought after. Of course, like most characters, they have their pasts shown, where we learn about Doflamingo being a former noble until his father relinquished his status, taking Doflamingo, his brother Rocinante, and their mother to the human land. And things immediately went downhill. The family was hunted down by former victims of the celestial dragons, Doflamingo's mother dies, and the rest of the family was being hunted down like rabid animals. Eventually they get caught and tortured until Doflamingo uses Conqueror's Haki for the first time. And after that, Doflamingo slowly began to crawl out from the depths of despair, gaining allies, killing his father, getting his devil fruit, the Ito Ito no Mi, and eventually he created a pirate crew in the North Blue with his goals and aspirations growing with no one getting in his way, even his family and own brother. Even his own brother, Rocinante, who he guns down after learning his deception, thinking his brother was a mute and was a dog of the military. Now, I've given you a bit of a condensed backstory on the character. There are a lot more details than what this video will provide, but I wanted to give a brief introduction to the character so we can be on the same page. What I find more fascinating about is Doflamingo's design. Oda does have a tendency to play around with his character's designs and body types and isn't afraid of going outside the norms when it comes to them. Oda will oftentimes pull real-world influence from actual people and insert them into his characters as well. Take for example Spandam and WWE's Mick Foley. The mask kinda makes it obvious here. Or Hulk Hogan has a few instances for Whitebeard. I bring this up in relation to that of Doflamingo because when you think of a villain, you normally don't think of a guy with an outrageous, if not fashionable, pink feather boa and long hairy legs as a major villain. Granted, not every villain needs to be dressed up in black, nor should they. If anything, the look really stands out, with Doflamingo honestly being a lot more of a down-to-earth body type with a more exuberant choice of outfit, even though he's like 10 feet tall. Plus, sound out in the comments if you got the leg hair representation that you all wanted, I guess. And this is where we get to the real-life inspiration, with the comparison being to the French songwriter Polnareff. As stated, Doflamingo's signature clothing is a pink feather boa and a few flamboyant outfits, which was also a signature for Polnareff. Doflamingo also wears opaque sunglasses at all times, which Polnareff had to wear because of deteriorating eyesight too. Granted, there's actually more to the sunglasses than a lot of people like to think, and that's because Oda actually referenced Kamen Rider in Doflamingo's glasses. Yes, he actually referenced an older picture he drew from the days of Kamen Rider Super 1, and I can see it in Doflamingo's glasses. And I gotta say, I love the look of Super 1's eyes as well, so good choice. Fun fact though, Doflamingo was initially supposed to be a rapper, And I'm gonna be honest, I'm really glad that didn't happen, cause I got war flashbacks to rapper-based villains.
Ooh, you rangers make me mad! Waking me up with a rap that bad!
I, and assume a lot of other people, can enjoy the small nods and references to Doflamingo's design, as well as how it just works. He's tall, he's imposing, and he certainly has a memorable style, especially for a villain that's quite memorable and a cast that's as colorful as One Piece. In that regard, Doflamingo certainly succeeds. Of course, when you talk about villains, they need to be more than just a wicked design. They gotta be threatening.
But can you believe that the Celestial Dragons would tell a 10-year-old boy they wouldn't take back someone from a line of traitors? It was then that I found there was no escaping this hell. From that moment forward, I swore that I would destroy everything they held dear.
I would like to point out that one of the more fascinating aspects of Doflamingo is that he built himself up from the lowest of the low, and became a part of one of the biggest powers in the entire world of One Piece. Yes, he started off with a silver spoon in his mouth, when he was a celestial dragon and the world was at his fingertips. But when his father decided to live amongst the regular people, and subsequently turned their lives into hellfire, things were tough. If you recall the speech that he gave at the beginning of this video, when we learn of his past, we learn he was speaking from experience. He was raised in the lap of luxury, every lower being had to do as he commanded, and he had to suffer for years after it. It's almost respectable when you consider that he had almost the entire world against him. Then he established himself as the biggest name in the underworld as Joker. He was one of the strongest members of the 7 warlords, and managed to do what his contemporary Crocodile wasn't able to: take over an entire nation, and almost in a single night too. So already we have a character who was able to build up a reputation and can back it up, but what really stands out about the character is that we learn that he was a brat, as most celestial dragons are. But he did love his mother and was protective of his brother Rosinante later in life, and suffered a lot more than what a kid should have. One of One Piece's strengths is to dive into the backstory of a lot of its arc-focused characters. Sometimes I do think there's a bit too much of a dive where it does hurt some of One Piece's storytelling, but that's for a different video. I will say that when we get a deep dive into Doflamingo's backstory, it's probably one of those stronger backstories for a villain in the show, since we see that while yes, he chose to become stronger from those days of torture, he still had those fears gripping his soul for years after. I say this not to excuse the actions that I'll talk about after this, but to point out that it's a humanizing element to his character. Doflamingo is a horrible, irredeemable villain with an awful personality. But that doesn't mean he wasn't human, and seeing these sides of the character does a good job of fleshing him out. He's still a monster though, and that's easily shown through his actions. He's wicked, he's cruel, he's a manipulator, both with his mental games and his own devil fruit powers. He became the king of Dressrosa by manipulating the former king Riku, Doldo III, to attack the people of his own kingdom, and in turn made the citizens turn against the king. He had his subordinates transform many of the inhabitants of the kingdom into toys, which also erased them from people's memories, making them into a cheap workforce to have weapons be created and sent to warring kingdoms that Doflamingo himself sparked up so he could make a profit. All the while making Dressrosa look like a land of fun, joy, love, and passion. And even though Doflamingo worked for the Navy as one of the 7 warlords, even Marines and government officials were turned to toys to prevent the secret from leaking out. That's just one side of Doflamingo's treachery, since he also has his own man Virgo infiltrate the Navy and become a high-ranking official who helped out Doflamingo's ambitions. And that's not even going into the deal that Doflamingo has with Kaido to produce the Smile Devil Fruits, the artificial devil fruits. The man has a lot of connections, had a lot of standing in the world as a superpower, has at least 2,000 soldiers at his beck and call, and was also part of the underworld brokering, such as trafficking of drugs, slave trading, production and distribution of weapons of mass destruction, and devil fruits. He was a big player. He was Joker. To put it simply, he's a bad guy. Of course, that's not even considering his actual physical abilities and devil fruit. The man is capable of slicing 3 buildings into 2 with a single kick. He's a very strong individual, being capable of delivering a powerful kick to Luffy, who was shown prior able to defend against in an earlier battle. And he's able to take hits as well, being frozen solid, taking a direct Red Hawk from Luffy, and even had numerous organs rupture all at once. and was able to walk that off with his devil fruit by creating stitches to get them back together just so he can get back to fighting Luffy. Oh yes, his devil fruit, the Ito Ito no Mi, the ability to create and manipulate strings. Now on the surface, that doesn't sound like a good power. Then again, you can't really stoop as low as becoming a human skin suit. But like a lot of powers in One Piece, it really comes down to execution, since the strings in and of themselves are thin and extremely durable, even strong enough to cut through pretty much anything, and the strings can originate from anywhere on the user's body, or even within it to stitch up his organs as demonstrated earlier. Some of the powers that Doflamingo has shown with his devil fruit and his creativity with it include using the strings to swing on clouds to make it appear as though he's flying through the air, creating a doppelganger, using his strings to slice a gigantic meteor and even an entire country to ribbons, shoot strings at his opponent like a bullet, and create a protective barrier web. And probably one of the cruelest is his ability to control people, like a puppet on strings, and he can do this to numerous people at once. Then there's also his awakening, where he has the ability to transform non-living things in his area into strings that he can manipulate freely. On a physical and combat level, the guy is one you don't want to mess with. And then there's his psychological warfare. One such example is when he used the Mera Mera no Mi to bait Luffy to run off and slightly mess with the alliance between Luffy and Law. Doflamingo isn't a dumb character. He has a lot of insight into people, as well doing what he can to tactically make sure that he has the advantage, such as offering prize money and a chance to survive for the people of Dressrosa to turn against Luffy and the others. All in all, Doflamingo does deserve the level of threat he's earned, and he's still a monster. However, that's not what I find truly fascinating about the character. Doflamingo, while he has a tragic past, he doesn't use it as a means to play victim. Rather, it's more his subordinates that do that. They make excuses about how his life was unfair and how Doflamingo was in the right. But Dofi himself? Yeah, he does have some sympathetic qualities, and he's actually a very important character when it comes to the world building, as well as establishing the politics of the world. Doflamingo pushed it more and more. Also, amongst most of the villains in the entirety of One Piece, he was the one who did get a huge amount of personal backstory and times to see him alone. And we see him have empathy for his crew. To me, he's a popular villain because you know that despite his past, he is still a huge monster, and we revel in delight seeing him clash against the heroes. There's a difference between hating a character and hating on a character. To hate a character based on their actions depends on how their role is played. When you're a villain and you're involved in things like weapon and slave trafficking, you're not meant to be considered a good person. But that doesn't mean you can't be a well-written character, and that doesn't mean people can't like a villain like this. Humanized is a more appropriate term, since it's more made to understand where Doflamingo's motivations come from. He's a fictional representation of pure evil, to collapse the world government and become the immortal king of the world. It sounds evil standard fare, but there's a phrase that rings true. It's not the end of the journey that matters, but the journey itself. We love to watch characters like Doflamingo, monsters who are beyond redemption. We love to see them soar to great heights, watching them accrue their victories and hurt others to show how vile they are. It just makes their fall all the more impactful and greater for our heroes. He's a great villain. He's a megamaniacal powerhouse, fueled by greed, hatred, and immature entitlement, willing to manipulate countless lives and abuse those who would be loyal to him for no other reason than to find amusement. He's willing to kill without hesitation or remorse, all with a smile on his face. And it's rather uncomfortable to have a character constantly smiling, even when committing some heinous acts. To get back to the humanity aspect, it's not to showcase he's sympathetic, but to show that he's a real person. Well, so to speak, he's still fictional, but you get my point. We get scenes that show he mourns for those who work for him. Virgo and Monet, grateful for their service. Even when he asked Monet to blow up the Punk Hazard Island, he asks for her forgiveness. We also spend a lot more personal time with the character. Other villains like Crocodile, Enel, or Rob Lucci, we see more of his past. We see different sides to Doflamingo. We've seen him thinking. We've seen him shaken up by the chains of his past. These are elements of humanity that we didn't really get to see with other villains. It's these elements that make him such a fascinating character, and even more so as a villain, since it opens up that there's a spark of humanity within him. He just chooses to drown it with his own desires, goals, and does it with a ton of entertainment value thrown along with it. It makes you feel like this character, this person could be real. He manipulates not only the characters of the world, but the audience itself. And it's in the same vein as to why a lot of people love the character like the Joker from Batman. A perpetual smile, capable of amazing cruelty, a master manipulator, a snappy dresser, and of course,
some men just want to watch the world burn.
sadism. That's what really stems from this. A smile to hide the cruelty that lays beneath. A monster created by the world's twisted structure and the celestial dragons. That's what I find fascinating about Doflamingo.
What do you think happens to monsters once they've lost their source of food and are off their leashes? Is there anyone who rules these seas who can rein them in? Who possesses the most power, the most influence in these waters? So what happens now, you think? There are more pirates running wild out there than ever before, but there's just one empty seat. You get it now? All those pirates are about to have a struggle for supremacy. The greatest in history!
As per tradition with this channel and series, I do like to point out how the villains act as a good foil for the main characters that they fight against. Doflamingo is a little more complicated, since there's a lot more personal connection with not the main character Luffy, but rather the character Trafalgar D. Law. But that doesn't mean there aren't some parallels or points of comparison that can't be made with Luffy. Although, funnily enough, Doflamingo is more of a foil to Sanji of all characters, but that's not for this video. If you want to see one for that, put in the comments. It's all about the smiles. And if we get 10k likes, who knows, maybe I'll make a video about that. Doubt we'll get there though. Anyway, Luffy. One of the things that really shows how Luffy and Doflamingo work as opposing forces would be freedom. It's one of the core themes of the entire One Piece storyline, with Luffy's goal of being a pirate is to live a life of true freedom. Meanwhile, Doflamingo is also a man of freedom, but a lot of his actions will often remove freedom from others. Most notably his ability to control people against their wills. Luffy, funnily enough, is the only character to actually break free from the string control during his fight. One thing I do need to add to this is that Doflamingo sees himself as the superior being, and he comments that he hates when Luffy is above his head. And here's the thing about Luffy. It's one of his traits that Oda makes clear is that Luffy shares the beliefs of his enemies by defeating them. For them to suffer defeat and to have their beliefs destroyed is as bad as death. Killing their bodies is beside the point. Oda feels that as a pirate, Luffy and his enemies care more about victory and defeat than they care about their lives. It's been well established that Luffy, while he likes heroes, doesn't want to be one. But what he does care about is freedom. And a lot of the times, if he sees a jerk messing with someone who's just trying to fulfill their dream or such, he'll respond by breaking the dream of the jerk. And oftentimes this leads up to beating up the loser. So when Luffy stops Doflamingo from killing Law, it's the first step to breaking Doflamingo. And it's a scene I personally really like.
You know I've been looking forward to this. How dare you stop me?
I find Doflamingo to be an entertaining and fascinating villain, one of pure evil. He's probably one of the most fleshed out villains in all of One Piece since he gets such a detailed explanation for his backstory, and we get to see how much of a vile piece of sludge he can be, all the while being entertaining and fun to watch. Think about a lot of villains, especially villains in the modern day, and this is something that I've said numerous times, they don't really do the justice for their stories, and they aren't really all that much of a villain. A lot of times villains are portrayed to be overly sympathetic, or they're not really the villains but just misunderstood, or they have a righteous cause. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I want every villain to be Doflamingo, that'd be just as boring. But I don't know if it's because I'm getting older and I've been consuming a ton of different types of media, especially more lately, but I'm just getting really sick of seeing these trends, especially when I see a ton of other villains becoming a bit more formulaic and seeing terrible people being painted as positives simply because they just happen to be popular or whatever. Doflamingo though? He's popular, yes, but he's a bastard through and through, and that's why I personally love the guy as a villain. But what are your guys' thoughts? Let me know down below in the comments. I'm MangaKamen, and thanks for watching. Don't forget the smiles.
I'd better watch my loose tongue. What a rotten mess I could cause. Just think, what if I told the whole world the secret Marie-Joie is hiding? Why does it matter if it's revealed now? Power doesn't last long.
It'll rot faster than anyone thinks.